What's going on, everybody? Today is Monday, October 30th, and you are listening and watching the Daily AI Show live, and we are excited to be back for another week of amazing shows. And today we're going to be talking about something that's pretty much on all of our minds all the time, which is AI automation. But, not to keep that too broad or whatever, but what we really want to talk about is, where are these automations being put in place? How deep do you need to go? Where do you start? If you're just starting to think about AI and where it might fit within your workplace, if you will, your business, where do you start? And truly, what makes an automation? Is it automation if it's two prompts running back to back in a chain? These are all just kind of questions to bring up and kind of dive into. So does anybody, before we kind of dive in, want to take a stab at automation in general? Maybe we'll dive in deeper after that, like an overview, not to put anybody in the spot, but an overview definition. Does anybody want to give it a shot?
Sure, I'll go for it.
Awesome.
So who are you? I don't recognize you. What is going on here, man?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we'll just get this over with real quick. I had a costume party, a Halloween party, had to shave my face, and so we'll leave it at that. Mystery. No. So automations, right? So in a broad sense, automations are essentially any form of programmatically designed tools or software to allow you to do a repeatable process many, many times, right? So one to many. In the terms of AI, we use automations, or we use AI as a component of any larger automation. It's a really good way for bringing in information, having it digested, getting your responses, and then the rest of the automation can take that data or information and spew it out wherever you want, and you can use it however you want. I'd say that's the easiest or broad strokes for it.
Yeah, and I want to jump on what you just said. You said two things I think really important: one to many, and a repeatable process. And if I can just go to kick off from the repeatable process part, that's where I think a lot of people aren't quite sure where they can bring AI into their business solutions. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to simply, break it down by, like, if you're a larger organization, break it down by team or individual departments. But even if you're a smaller group, if you're a team of running of, 50 or less or something like that, what I would ultimately do is, you could start with something as easy as a survey. And that survey could go out to your internal employees and say, like, hey, give me a rundown of the types of tasks that you do often, meaning, several times per week in a lot of cases. It doesn't have to be 100 times per week, but even if it's something that happens every single week, 3 times a week, then what you want to do is start looking at those tasks and just figuring out, okay, is this something, or is part of this something that I could perhaps replace with an AI solution as part of that? And what you might find after doing that due diligence is that, yes, there's parts of this, but it may not be the whole. And so then you really have to dive in and say, like, well, is part of this AI? Is part of this more of like a if this then that type scenario, where it's not really any AI involved at all? It's just simply an automation. Like it grabs this thing from Stripe and it puts it over here. That's not really an AI solution, but to your point, Jimmy, it may be part of an automation that has AI in it. And then you can actually start looking at saying, okay, what would actually save our team time or this individual time if I took this off their plate and they didn't have to do this repeatable task that's happening every single week? So I just wanted to start there because I think a lot of people, I definitely talk to a lot of people who somehow believe that automation has to be some sort of replacement for a complex task. And it actually, most cases, isn't. It's usually just small pieces of fairly simplistic tasks that are happening over and over and over again that we're just simply trying to take off the plate of people working at the organization. So anyway, I thought that was fantastic.
I think as it pertains to AI, and obviously automations have been around for a while, but they've been made a little bit easier through or not so much easier, but they've opened up the gates with AI. So I think where I see automations in the context of this conversation is when you have done it once or twice or 3 times in a week or 2 weeks using a typical ChatGPT model, then you want to automate that. And so that's when it involves an API. So when I think of automation in the context of AI, I think of you're already using an AI tool, but you're doing it repetitively. So now let's figure out a way to automate that particular. I'm not talking about, automating emails or responses, which is something that can be done with Zapier and HubSpot for years. I'm talking about, going into an API and automating a series of tasks that you already were doing with a ChatGPT or whatnot. So I think that's the difference between old automation and new automation.
I want to add a point about that, which is automations have been around for a long time. Zapier is one that first came onto the scene, to my attention anyway, and that was 10 years ago. That's moving data. The old automation, what you're talking about, Robert, the old one is moving data around, automating little steps that, you might go like, hey, I get an email in here. I want it to go into this database. I can automate that step using APIs and a low-code tool like Zapier. What makes this brilliant with AI is now you have a really competent assistant that is addressable in the workflow of that automation that can process the data. And that's the leap forward. So now that AI can do processes against data that's coming in, you can put together these chains of actions in a workflow in a low-code automation tool that actually do much, much more and achieve much greater things than we could before.
That's brilliant. But I want to bring on this question right here, or this comment from Dan. You should never automate something unless you know it directly contributes to profit or productivity. Now, I instantly want to jump on that and say false. but I want to give him the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, well, I get it. I get the reason why. And I guess his previous comment, which is also brilliant, I thought, he says so much of his job is telling founders what isn't worth automating, which I think is funny. Right. So maybe he's really coming from a particular stance that you got these people that don't know what they're talking about. Oh, just automate it. So I can see how his second comment or his first comment kind of related to that. But the reason I would want to push back on that is that sometimes you cannot necessarily tie it to a profitability or sales or cost-cutting function, but because it's time, and you don't really know how much time is valuable to an employee or a series of employees. So I think it might not be readily available that automation is necessary. But Carl, you were going to say something too when Andy was going to talk.
Yeah, from an automation, like I've been setting up quite a lot of automations, starting with a couple with my clients, and then at work as well. And I think what I've been noticing from clients is a lot of them are like, could you do this, like a lot of steps? And it's like, well, we'll have to break those down, and we can't maybe not automate everything, because as much as there is actually, I don't know if you all know, there's about a month or two, maybe 3 months ago, there was this huge boom with AI automation agencies. They're trying to get everyone's business because they can automate everything. And I think that kind of fell on its face because there has to be some sort of human review. You can't just it has to be reviewed on a regular basis to start with, at the very least. So
you're talking about autonomous agents or just
no, pure, using Zapier, Make, right, and those kind of things. And then from an internal perspective too, it kind of goes to what we're talking about here, which is fascinating, to what we're going to be talking about on Thursday, where about that widening gap. The more you automate, the only way that you can actually do this is if there's only so much we know the processes. Like other departments and other teams will have to think about potentially what they could automate. And I think this is where the huge opportunity is, because if you have started or understand AI automation, and you can bridge that gap with those teams or people that are spending hundreds of hours doing repetitive tasks that AI could do, there's that huge bridge. But I don't think with setting up a lot of automations, you can't do everything like you can't do everything. There's actually a pushback probably later in the show where I've just been finding out it's like, you can't do this, you can't do that. It's very difficult to do that, or it's just a lot of work to maintain that. So while there is a huge opportunity, it's still not 100, like you can't automate it purely end to end and just let it go.
Well,
yeah, not end to end.
And that question, this is something that would come up in the prompting course that Brian and I were instructors for. The whether you can or can't, then you need to look at your time, right? Are you going to spend more time automating this and then checking it than it's going to save you? One of the paradigms that is useful for this is if you have an intern, is this a job that you can set up specific instructions and the intern can do it, right? That may be a good use case for automation. The other thing that comes into this, and we've talked about this in our chatbot shows, is automations are like set, scripted, kind of like this, then that, then that. But the assessment portion can be natural language. And literally, we were having a conversation before the show, and I was like, ooh, I need to set up an automation in my inbox to let me know if I've been invited to the beta of something I signed up for 4 months ago. I don't need to script that in terms of the exact language that the invitation is going to come. I can write a prompt that will say assess for this kind of thing, and it will be pretty accurate about that.
You know, I have a use case that was pretty interesting. So back in December, when I was first getting used to or getting into the AI thing with GPT, you know, way back then, we're helping my wife with her side business. She's got a bookkeeping business, and she wanted me to do some journal entry stuff, not really journal entries, but get it ready so she can do journal. Anyway, long story short, the task I was doing was very Excel spreadsheet, export the report, then do this Excel thing, and then format this. It was just like a lot of steps. I'm like, golly, this is so annoying. How can I do this faster? Right. So this is exactly right. My first thought was, how can I do this an automation or some kind of speed it up? You know, although the automation itself wasn't AI based, the way I got to it was. So I went to ChatGPT. I said, how do I make a macro for Excel? Now, that piece right there, I had no idea what macros were. I had no idea how to write them, or even how to start it. And it told me everything. And now I literally do Command J, Command K, save. And it's ridiculously easy. And it took me probably 3 hours. And now it takes me 10 minutes. I still, charge her the same, but it's a joke we have between us. But it took me like almost 2 days to figure out and get it all tweaked right. So you were saying earlier in that comment, Beth, you were like, the time it takes you and the people, once I figured out, once I've honed it, it hasn't really messed up since then. That's been like 10 months, right? So I love that kind of using AI to generate a automation. Doesn't necessarily use AI every time. It just uses it in the beginning. So that's just one thought I had.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's maybe another analogy I can kind of add to this. I was just actually writing funny enough, I was writing a companion piece to a video that came from our show about mega prompting versus task driven prompting. And in the LinkedIn post I put out today, I was talking about I said teenager, she'll be a teenager in like 7 days. So my daughter's birthday is coming up. And, but basically what I was saying is like, kind of like the intern analogy. Okay. If I just tell my teenager, if I just start talking to her and I'm like, hey, Sophie, like, I need you to do your laundry. And, while we're thinking about it, blah, 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 I could talk for 3 minutes straight. My daughter's going to go, what? Right. And I'm going to go, what part of what? And she's going to go, what do you want? what did you want me to do? Like, she phased out so early in that conversation, right? So I always think about that, about the mega prompting and the task-driven prompting, which is one part of this, which is break your pieces down into smaller pieces that a teenager is going to, like, first get her attention, make sure she understands the first thing you said to her, and then work yourself through the process. But also I think about it in terms of, like, when you think about, you know, automation, which is this idea of, to Robert's point, and as well, which is, you know, sometimes you're going to work through this process of 3 hours of figuring out how to automate something, and it's going to fail. Sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes it's going to fail. Sometimes it's not going to have a net positive. Back to Dan's point about being, you know, saving time, saving money. What did he say? If it's unless, you know, directly contributes to profit or productivity. And I agree, kind of. I think I understand what you were saying, Dan, to that. But Robert, I agree with you, which is like, sometimes, you know, it's like a time savings, and it may not be as directly tied to ROI, but you know that it used to take 4 hours and now it takes 2. But I do think there's a lot to be said for figuring out what those tasks are. To your point, Beth, like, you know, we use the intern step is, and just think about the things that you do. Like, this is step 1 as far as I'm concerned, as far as like any help that I could send out to anybody for automations. Just think about the things that you're doing today and break those down into simple tasks as much as you can, all the way down into simple tasks. And then even give it to somebody else at your work and go, could this be broken down into smaller tasks? Like, quite literally, could I hand this to a teenager? Back to the teenager point. Could I hand this to the teenager? And even if they didn't really know the specifics of this job, could they follow this? Does it make sense from one step to another? Then my point to, like, my last point on this is a great example of this show. So a great use case for us for automation is building in automations for the back end of this show. It seems like it probably just happens every day and we all show up at 10 o'clock, but there's things to be done prior to and after the show. And each one of us has individual pieces and parts to play to that. And one of the things, Jimmy, we talked about early on was, hey, it would probably actually be great to just pay a teenager like a minimum wage. You know, here in Florida, it's now $12 an hour, right? Because it's low, easy work, but it's just repetitive work that we don't necessarily want to do. And what we were saying was, maybe I could just pay somebody or my daughter or something like that to go do these AI automations. But if we jumped into that too early and said, here you go, without fully understanding all the parts and pieces and refining and getting those automations to work, it wouldn't be nearly as effective. And so what actually has to happen is we have to go through the manual process first. So that was actually you stole my point. I was waiting for you to stop talking. That was it. you got there at the very end. That's what I was going to say. So at WSI, what we do with our clients is just like you said, because, you know, we don't want to jump into a conversation with a client and their employees and say, yeah, I need to automate these tasks, because then obviously you're going to have uproar in the employees, because, like, I do that every day. It takes, you know, I'm paid to do that. What, you're going to take that away from me? So you have to first recognize that. But back to your last point you made, you got to make sure it's a task that is already repetitive and data driven and all the stuff that we talk about that automation can help with. But more importantly, going back to the other point I made, that employees don't want to do. And so you don't have pushback. So what we try to do with it, we try to say, okay, first we want to look at something that's repetitive or data driven. And we want to look for the employees that recognize, yeah, I don't want to do this anymore. This is an annoying part of my workflow. And we have those, we're going to have buy-in from those people. We're not going to have a lot of pushback. So we make sure that we're looking for automation candidates that has to check those boxes, because otherwise you're going to have a hard time implementing.
Brian, one thing I'm going to start doing with my daughter would be, I want you to act as the world's greatest dishwasher, world's greatest room cleaner, world's greatest, I don't know, person who mows my lawn, landscaper. Yeah. Here's the context. Here's the criteria. Yeah. Here's my direct instruction. Yeah. I hope you got all that.
And then you have to follow up with Carl, take a deep breath. Yeah, pause before you take a deep breath.
Explain your reasoning.
And then also, did you understand the directions? Can you repeat the directions back to me before you proceed with your response? Because that would go a long way with my daughter. Did you understand what I said to begin with, or is it just a knee-jerk reaction of what? There's a lot of similarities. That's what my
we can't be long-winded in our prompts, Brian. The AI might, you know.
Okay, so for people who are like, why was that funny? This is a known format for prompting AI. And if you have more questions about that, you should be a member of the AI exchange. So
okay, I'd like to hear some experiences with actual coding of automations in the low code systems, because I find them very fragile, very, very tricky and difficult to make sure that each step in an automation sequence actually completes effectively and stays like an automation should, effective even when unsupervised. Go.
Okay, so
I got a lot. Yeah, go for it.
I'll just say I'll say it's a 50-50 for me. Like if you're using a low code or a no code solution such as Zapier or Make, if the integration or module is built well and explains what each section or attribute is, then it works cleanly, right? Everything's explained. But when either the base system that you're trying to access, or let's say their API, or and therefore the integrations with them aren't built well, aren't explained well, then you have all kinds of problems. Case in point, LinkedIn is terrible with building or being used to build automations because their integrations, no matter the platform that I've seen so far with any of these automation platforms, Integromat, Zapier, Make, whoever, right? Automate.io, all of those. It's the system itself, the APIs itself are built very, in terms of automation, aren't built very well. There isn't a lot of good communication, and that could just be because of LinkedIn's, privacy policies and terms and all that kind of stuff. But I have not seen a single well-made integration with LinkedIn, and it's because of that. So, Andy, yes, when it works, easy, no problem. When it doesn't work, terrible, and you need to spend more time building it.
Well, I'll actually add to that. When it works really, really well, then we're actually experiencing this problem with one of our tools, that it's hitting the limit, not our token limit, but our limit of how many times we can access the OpenAI API. And we're like, we're getting shut off. So we actually had to put in delays from our usage just so that we cannot hit that limit. That's kind of a problem. So we're actually thinking about, well, maybe we need to use 2 different logins. We have 2 different accounts so that it can switch back and forth. But man, so I mean, you're right. It hasn't quite you can't set it and forget it, to Andy's point. You gotta monitor.
In fact, I think that's
load balancing is a great idea.
What was that? I'm sorry, Jimmy.
Oh, I was just saying to what Robert was talking about. Load balancing is a great idea, and there's a lot of different easy ways to be able to do that if you have multiple accounts or multiple logins.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as far as the use case, and also this is a great, I mean, for those listening that are thinking about, well, what are the potentials for AI and stuff? One of the ones we're always talking about as far as jobs is they're going to have to be people who are good at monitoring and evaluating automations. I'd imagine at some companies that will be a full-time job, and maybe several jobs at a large company, because it's going to take that. They are going to break because of prompt drift and other reasons we can get into in other shows. But as far as use cases, okay, so I've built in easy ones, like the super couple step automations. But what I do is I do break down each individual task into its own ChatGPT prompt. So for instance, I work in sales. So internally, I said, we're always looking at new people that we might want to reach out to as far as prospecting, sort of an cold outbound sequence. I said, but my coworkers don't particularly, this is months ago, I was like, they weren't really in ChatGPT. So I was like, well, how do I solve that pain point? Because I was having trouble pushing them to the tool to actually do the thing, even though I was writing prompts from or anything like that. So I just wrote a simple automation. At that time, I did it in Zapier that just simply allows them to go to a Slack channel within our work. And it was called the prompt bot. and they literally put in the title of the person and the industry of the person. And what it does is it just goes from Slack, it goes over to Zapier, it runs through about 5 or 6 steps to it. But instead of it just being like, hey, ChatGPT, tell me about this industry and this role or persona, that might be broken out into 3 or 4 or 5 different prompts that are going to run concurrently. Like they're going to run one after the other, or consecutively, excuse me. Then it combines that. I have one more prompt at the end that says, take a look at everything you got so far before you give it back to me and evaluate it really quick. And then the last step is it sends it right back to Slack. From the end user, from my coworker standpoint, all they saw was I type in probably like a 3-minute delay while it goes off into automation land and comes back. And then boom, it just shows right up there on the next step in Slack saying exactly what it was. And that's all they had to do. Super easy automation. It's something literally any business could put together. There was nothing fancy. There was no coding, none of that. It was a very, very easy, YouTubeable type automation that you could do. So I've definitely done those. And then we've definitely done other automations that are more client focused. But all of them, for me, at least at this point, is I don't have anything that's super, super fancy. I find that sometimes the easiest ones, if you just break them down into tasks, and you've run those tasks a few times and refined them outside of, in ChatGPT or OpenAI, the playground, or something like that, and you feel pretty confident that that prompt will continuously give you back good results, then that's a good indicator to try it inside an automation. Because to your point, Andy, like you don't want to put in automation first and then it just fails and fails and fails. You're like, these results are shit, and you're like, you don't know why, or the end user doesn't know why. And that's really costly for a business because all the end user sees is a really poor output from AI. And they go, I don't know why we're doing this. And now you've lost faith inside the business. And that could be really costly as well.
And I think that goes back to your initial point, or the point that you made before this comment, is that you're going to find that either because all of us are working with clients now, either you're going to have a subscription fee that allows you to continue to maintain that bill that you just did, or you're going to have to appoint somebody inside the organization that can monitor. I mean, it isn't the same guy that's like making sure your PC is plugged in and the printers work. It's not the IT department. It's going to be somebody who's a little bit more adept at the AI, which it's going to be a role. I mean, obviously they can't be just there to wait for stuff to break, but I mean, they kind of are, they kind of, it depends on the complexity of the organization, but in the interim, you're going to be that person, where we are going to be that person being in this AI ops kind of industry where we're supplying solutions to companies. We're going to have to stay on because prompt drift happens. They change the models, they change the format of the API. You're going to have to be there to help, navigate that with them.
Yeah.
Yep.
I wanted to throw this in really quick, only because he was responding earlier to Carl's thing. Just Greg was saying, hey, that's hilarious. I was teaching a meditation class recently and somebody asked about affirmations. I found myself dropping into the format, meaning the prompting format, when explaining that too. It's everywhere. So just the idea that, like Carl was saying about, act as an expert, or, affirmations. And this is what I want you to think about. And here are the instructions. So yeah, it's funny how this stuff creeps into our everyday life. But I think I'll just get a t-shirt for my daughter that says ChatGPT on it. And then every time I look at her, I'll be like, oh, that's right. I gotta think about this. We're going to have a better next couple of years if I just think through what I want her to do and what the real goals are. And honestly, that's a good analogy too, because it's just as much about the person writing the prompt as it is what you're expecting to get out of it. It really is, dirt in, dirt out type thing. So the better you get at being really specific about the things you want and staying really, really narrow in getting those results, the better your automations are going to be, because each one of those specific pieces and steps along the way is going to be really, really fine-tuned and tailored. And as we always say, it's super easy to figure out what breaks by keeping everything broken out and separate, because then you can go like, oh, well, it's that part right there. Okay, let me go into that part of the automation and make some tweaks. And then the whole thing, you can set the thing back up again. And to Robert's point, somebody's going to have to do that. This is not a set and forget type solution. I don't know any automation that you just set and don't look at for 6 months. Every one of them is going to take some time. Any other, as we're sort of wrapping up here with like sort of key takeaways, but any other use cases too that anybody wants to share for today?
I think they're the easiest ones that I've been running is, taking whether it's a audio dropping into Google Drive, taking a web page, turning it into content going into Google Drive, which kicks off a AI automation and then goes directly back to Slack. Now you can, if your company uses Teams, you can use Teams, but I think just another place where they don't have to go anywhere and it just comes directly into the place they're already at. And so those kind of automations are so easy, and it becomes so like, oh, this is great because I can see it. And like the task is, I used to have to do this. Now I just drag drop and it shows up on my Slack. Like that's like one of the easiest automations that I've been setting up. And it's been so easy for people to see it. So if something you want to get started, that's probably where I would go, is like make the endpoint wherever the people use it the most, whether it's your email or whether it's a communication channel like Slack.
Love it.
Yeah. I'd say if you are delving directly into a lot of AI as part of your automations, check out respell.ai.
And come on Friday.
Yeah.
Yep. We'll definitely be talking. Well, if you're interested in Respell, which is an automation tool, a no-code, low-code automation tool, a lot of us have been dealing with that. And we'll be talking about that on Friday's show. So definitely tune in for that.
So I'd also encourage people not to spend a whole ton of time trying to find the perfect place to automate, right? We've said, it should be these kinds of characteristics, but having that thought process where you go through like, okay, so this happens first and then this happens, that business process mapping is incredibly valuable, even if at the end of that you say, wow, this isn't a great candidate for automation, right? Just that process is super helpful.
Yeah, for training, for onboarding the next person, right? At some point, writing all those tasks down, or as you do, Beth, a great job of like mind mapping it out and laying it out. How is that going to be a negative thing for your business if you have that, even if it doesn't turn into an automation? And even if it doesn't turn into automation today, it might in a year. We don't know all the stuff that's coming over the hill. So that could be a great solution. I love that. Any final thoughts, Andy?
I'll just say one last thing. Automations are API programs, like they are creating an application out of a number of different tools that you can string together. There's a wide range of automation tools like that out there. One of the nice things about large language models is that they can give you advice on how to code. I haven't yet seen use of code interpreter, or what's now known as advanced data analysis. I haven't seen the code capabilities of LLMs applied to answering the questions that novice users using automation tools might have and getting assistance in programming those, because those aren't standard languages. But Jimmy, you may know about that.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say that I actually use ChatGPT to help me translate an output basically from Node.js into JSON so that my automation could recognize the code, and ChatGPT helped me with that translation.
Oh, no, I totally get that the LLMs are a key step in the process of tasks that are chained together. But what I'm saying is, when I'm struggling with the inadequacies of my knowledge of that low-code automation tool, I want to turn to ChatGPT soon and say, give me the automation that does this. Give me a language-driven automation tool. That's what's coming. I want that soon.
So
that's not there yet, but you can take a picture of the automation, right? If someone shows you the map and upload that through Vision and say, they say this happens first and this is the output. What's happening in the middle? And you can have a conversation about it.
Yeah. And all of those automation tools are building their AI builders. So Zapier, Make, all of them have their own AI builders. Yeah. Wait for the first major update before you implement any software.
And if you're listening, please make a smart chatbot before you do your natural language builder. Like, please. I just want to have a conversation. Like, hey, this is what your thing says. Explain it to me like I'm 5, right? Like, come on. All right. You've heard me say this before.
I love it. I want to say real quick, thanks to Dan and Greg, both for your comments on the show. We always appreciate that. Please keep them coming. And with that, we will be back tomorrow. I don't know what tomorrow's topic is right off the top of my head. I don't have it in front of me. So we'll be back tomorrow. We'll be back the rest of this week.
It'll be fascinating.
And, yeah, it'll be great. Whatever it is. I mean, I can't wait. I'm on the edge of my seat for it. We'll see you guys the rest of the week. Have a great one. Have a great Monday. Tomorrow's Halloween. See you guys. Bye.
Bye.
Aloha.
Whoa.